Hi stamping friends, welcome back. Sandi MacIver here. Today I'm going to share Copic coloring of this floral image, and then I'm heat embossing it and adding it to a dark background. I love coloring with Copic markers. It's relaxing and soothing, and with a great feeling of accomplishment when you complete a pretty project. I love how the bright, vibrant colors pop right off of this darker background. Of course, we can't achieve that by coloring on dark cardstock, but there's a fun workaround, and I learned it from Gina recently, and I'm going to share that today in the video. I'm going to be working with the Penny Black Harmony stamp, and you'll notice that it's a foam back rubber mounted stamp. And in order to use my MISTI along with this, I need to take out the foam base that's inside the MISTI, that black one right there. So pop it out, put your scratch paper back in, and then add the cardstock. And we're dealing with two pieces of Neenah Solar White. This is 80 pound, and each of them are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, a quarter sheet of cardstock. And we're going to be stamping this image twice. So I'm going to lay the stamp down to make sure I've got great coverage and it's fitting on my cardstock. I'm securing it with my MISTI magnets, and I'm just going to flip the top closed to secure the stamp onto the lid. I'm going to be coloring or using Gina Amalgam ink to stamp my image. It's Copic friendly, so it won't smear or anything when I'm using my Copics, but I'm just going to use a very light touch because we're going to come back and heat emboss this after it's been colored. That's kind of the secret to this technique today. So rub it gently across and get your image, and of course I'm going to do this to both pieces of my cardstock. So I'm just going to pop the other one back in. Make sure that you get it securely down in that bottom left hand corner because we're going to be restamping again, and the MISTI will help us position that exactly on top of where we have just stamped our image so that we don't have any extra duplicate lines or anything hanging out causing us problems in our image. So don't move that stamp, leave it right where it is. I'm using my basic colors of the pink Copics. They're RV 10, 11, 13, and 34. And I'm starting with the darkest one, the 34, and I'm doing the flicking technique. So from the center out of each petal, do a little flick. And I'm making each one of them a little bit higher as I go along. But I think these are magnolias, or that's what I'm going to say they are. When I was a kid, I used to call them tulip trees, and they always bloomed in the spring, and I absolutely love them. But magnolias are basically white around the tips, so that's where my inspiration came from for these flowers. And you'll see that I'm now working with my lightest color, which is the 10, and I'm using that as my blender as well to blend those pretty colors out. Now, I'm not going to color the whole thing, but I am going to do a few of them for you, so you just see the different ways that I add my highlights. So again, I'm starting with the 34, and I've got my base down there. My next one is the 13, and I'm adding a little bit more of a flick, a little bit higher up, coming in and following with the 11, adding a little bit higher flick, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to blend with the 10, and that evens out the colors for me and pulls it up just a tiny little bit more. It's a really, really pretty technique, especially on flowers. It also works very well on doggies and bears. So I'm going to do this last one up here for you. Again, the darkest color, and I'm flicking the 34, coming back with the 13. Oh, the 11, sorry. I think I got my colors mixed up for that one. It doesn't really matter because you're going to blend them together, but usually you go darkest to lightest. Trust me to mess up when the camera's on, right? Oh well, you get the idea, okay? So blending again with my 10. And for the greens, I am using YG03 and YG17, and I'm going to put a little bit of the darker color at the base of the flowers. And some of these are buds, but I wanted as much green as possible, so I colored them green instead of the pink because I needed the contrast on my card. And you also can very lightly go in and do the stems, but I use the lighter color for that. So this is the 17, and I'm coming back in, and I'm just blending it down, and I'm going to add the little stems. This is the 03, sorry. The 17 is the darker one. And it's okay if you go outside the lines on the stems because we're going to be covering it with a blue at the very end, and that's kind of the final step of this special technique. So get your green in there everywhere that you can. I'm going slow and trying to be really careful and stay within inside the lines so you think I'm a good colorer. And I don't have this sped up this time. I had a few people ask me not to speed it up so they could see the actual time. So here you go. By request, my slow coloring skills. I like to take my time. I usually have music going, or I'm watching something, well, I'm listening to something on TV. Seldom am I watching it. But I find this just so relaxing. I could sit and color all day. So there we go. The green is all ready, and I'm about to come to the end of this part, and I will finish coloring this offline as well as the other one. Next, you want to take your chamois and clean that black ink off of your stamp. Don't move the stamp. That's very important. And you want to make sure that your ink is dry, your Copic, okay? So I'm going to test this before I start, and I just used my anti-static, and I'm covering it with embossing powder to see if anything stuck, and it didn't. Yay! So we're going to do the embossing. So you pop that finished colored image back in, use your anti-static to make sure there's no fingerprints present, and I'm using Versamark ink, and I'm making sure it's really inked up, closing the lid, giving it a really good rub, and then I'm going to cover it with gold embossing powder, shake off any of the excess, and make sure that I don't have anything kind of floating around. Don't worry about anything that's kind of sticking on the outside if it happens to, because we're going to be cutting these out. So I'm going to heat set this, and then I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the second one. And here you can see how pretty it is with the gold. Hopefully you can see that. And here's the second one. I'm going to repeat the steps. Okay, I used my anti-static, then I stuck my fingers over top of it again. Don't do that. And adding my ink, stamping it over the image again, giving it a really good rub, and covering it with the embossing powder and heat embossing it. While we have the embossing powder out, we may as well do the sentiment, and it is on a photopolymer. So don't forget to put your foam pad back into your MISTI because you need the height. And I'm adding a scrap of the blue background paper, and this stamp set is called Love Sentiments, also from Penny Black. And I wanted a long, skinny sentiment to go across the center of my card. That way it's not going to cover up too much of my coloring. Don't want to do all that fabulous coloring and then cover it up with something, right? So again, anti-static. And I inked up my stamp, stamping the image, and again covering it with the embossing powder, shaking off the excess, and heat set it until it turns shiny. I find it easier to do my sentiments on larger pieces of paper, and then I just pop them into my cutter afterwards, line it up along the edge of that cutting. You'll see that there is a nice edge there to line them up. I line it up with a plastic grid that's on top, and then there's the nice cutting edge down the other side. And I find this a lot easier because you get a lot more to hold on to while you're trying to do your embossing. And then I'm just going to trim off the two ends so that it's nice and compact for the front of my card. Fussy cut haters, turn away because we need to fussy cut these little guys out, and I'm using my little tiny scissors to do that. And now they're all done, and I'm finding a marker that is the same color as my background. In this case, I'm using Gina K Turquoise C, and my closest marker was BG13. And so you have to be careful at this step because Copic markers, you can tear the tip up with the embossing powder. Embossing powder is little shards of plastic, and even though we melt them to our paper, they're still sharp. So by continually rubbing your tip of your pen really hard against embossing powder, you can actually shred the tip. And you can buy replacement tips, but I find if you go gently, it's not that much of a problem. And you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm filling in all the white in the background and around the edge. And right here, I feel like my pen is going to blob. This happens to be an extremely full one. If you take both ends of your marker off, that will eliminate the pressure that is in the barrel of the marker, and you won't get any more of those bloppy things. So there's another tip there for you. So see, I'm just gently working my way around, covering up all those little white pieces and anything that's in between. And I'm pushing very gently, and I'm only using the very tip of my marker. And doing it this way, I have actually not shredded any tips, but I have in the past when I've done a whole thing, when I have embossed it and colored the entire thing with my Copics after it's been embossed, I have trashed a couple of tips. So fair warning, just saying. But isn't this pretty? And I'm almost finished. And of course, we're going to do this to both of them. And you just need one layer. No blending required. I guess you can if you want to. This is supposed to be a fast and fun card. So finish both of those, and then you're going to lay them down on your card front. And so I need a card base. This is Neenah 110 and 4 1/4 by 11, scoring and folding at 5 1/2. And I'm going to use foam tape. And I've got a cheap trick here for you. Pull out your MISTI, pull that foam pad out of there again, and to perfectly line up your card front that you're going to put on your card base, add your adhesive to the back of the card front, pop your card base into your MISTI in that top left-hand corner, nice and snug, and then you've got a nice edge to push right up against to get that card front on there perfectly. So I've got foam tape on the back of my florals, and I'm popping them down, and yes, there's overhangs. Don't worry about that for a sec. Trying to figure out where I'm going to position this one. I was trying to get that stem right off of the card, but it didn't work that way. And then I'm going to use a couple more of my foam squares for the sentiment, and I end up taking off the center one because it's overlapping my flowers, which are already popped up. And if you get too high, you have to pay extra postage, and you know me, I hate that because I'm cheap. Okay, so popping my center down, or my sentiment down there in the center, turn the card over and use a nice long pair of scissors to trim off those edges nice and snug against the side of the card. And this would make an awesome Easter card too. You could just change out the sentiment. You could also add a little cross or some bunnies. And for now, I am going to finish by embellishing with some pretty pink posh, and this is Valentine's Jewels, and I just poured them into a Studio Cassia tray. I love this thing. You'll see at the end why. And I'm flicking out some of them to add to my card, and I'm digging through looking for the pink ones because the white ones don't really show up. So there's a couple of shades of pink in there, a light and a dark, which works perfectly with my art pieces. So I'm going to add a bunch of them. And then I am going to use my Tombow multi-purpose glue to glue these little guys down. And I'm one of those people who has rather warm fingers, so I can just see, I can pick them up with my warm fingers and just put them back down again. But I have ordered the Studio Cassia wand. It should be here in a couple of weeks. I just ordered it from Simon Says. So I will be using that next time you see me doing this on a video. Because there, see, I get dropsies, and the wand will stop that from happening. So just the last couple that I am putting on there, and I just think that that bling is the perfect addition to this pretty card. Don't you? So here's my trick. Pop those little guys back in there. And then the opening to my little package that I have moved my jewels into is quite small. So even folding a piece of paper and getting it back there is kind of tedious. Look at that. Works perfectly. Popped everything back in there nice and snug and squeezing it shut. So there you go. There's my card. Isn't it pretty? And doesn't it look like it's just painted right on that dark cardstock? I just think it's fabulous, and it just really, it's a wow card without a whole bunch of work. So all the supplies I used are listed below. There's also a link to my blog for a free PDF download. Hope you enjoyed today's card and video, and if you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up. I would appreciate that. And until next time, toodles!